Hey everybody, welcome to one of the very first episodes of Brave Boys Beyond with your host Jordan. And on this premiere series of The Good, the Bad, and the Why, we're going to be taking a look at Mike Barr's Batman Year 2. Let's check it out. Batman Year 2 is written by Mike Barr with art for the very first issue by Alan Davis until a disagreement he had with DC. And then Todd McFarlane stepped in to do the rest of the issues, except for Full Circle, which is a sequel to this series and doesn't matter. I'll get into it later. But let's talk about Batman Year 2 and what is it? Now, going by the name, you may have figured that Batman Year 2 is a sequel to Batman Year 1, which was originally written by Frank Miller, and this is a phenomenal comic that everybody should read, especially if you love Batman. This is the origin story for Batman in the modern era. This was written back, I believe, in 1984, and still to this day is the current beginning to Batman. This is a follow-up that I feel like DC mandated to roll off of the hype of Year 1. We would have a Year 2, and surprisingly enough, there is a Year 3, which we might talk about someday. Hopefully. The boots that Batman Year 2 have to fill are extraordinary because Year 1 is such a masterpiece in writing that you'll notice a lot of shock factor used in Year 2 in order to build up hype for the story. I think Mike Barr did the best that he could with what he had and what limitations that DC would put on him, and I'll kind of explain in a little bit. And I'm just going to be honest and straightforward from the beginning. Batman Year 2 is probably one of my least favorite stories out there, period. There are other Batman stories that are worse. I'm looking at you, Dark Knight Strikes Again. But, my gosh, Batman is not written like Batman at all. He does a lot of things that you wouldn't really expect, nor does it make sense. And I'll get into it right now, actually. You know what? Let's do that. Let's clear off the table from this guy. And let's get into what Year 2 is. Captain Gordon, now Commissioner Gordon, is in charge of the police department, not really cleaning up the corruption like he does in Year 1. Instead, it's kind of just assumed that either the police department is clean now or there is still corruption, but it's not talked about whatsoever. Year 2 opens with the return of the Reaper. Now you're thinking, the Reaper? I've never heard of him in any other Batman comic before, and you're correct, because this is his first appearance. And my goodness, is an appearance. So the origin of the Reaper is that years before Bruce became Batman, the Reaper was a vigilante in Gotham who would kill the villains. And that's how he would clean up the streets, unlike Batman, who would send them to Blackgate or send them over to Arkham Asylum. Once the Reaper felt like his job was done, he took off and was never seen again. And then later down the line, you get corruption that happens in Gotham, as we see in Year 1. The streets need to get cleaned up, and Batman steps in. The Reaper then feels like it's time for him to make his return after decades since he's last left. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, that's actually a pretty good premise to the book. Batman's up against another vigilante, just this one kills and Batman doesn't. Well, I would say yes, until we get to the nonsensical parts. Okay, I'm going to give a spoiler warning now that I am going to talk about the entirety of this book, and I think it's okay for me to talk about spoilers. I mean, the book's 30 years old. This is the 30th anniversary deluxe edition. And on top of that, it's not a great story, and you probably should not read it. But in case you do want to read it, and you want to keep, I don't know, the story a surprise, I mean, yeah, skip ahead. Okay, so we have two plots running concurrently within Batman Year 2, kind of not similar at all as Batman Year 1 that has two plots running concurrently, but you have Bruce, who wants to date Rachel, which Rachel and her father just reappeared in the city, surprisingly at the same time as the Reaper reappeared in this city. And then you have plot B, which is Batman gets his handed to him by the Reaper constantly, and then he pushes on further to the bad side of Gotham in order to destroy or stop the Reaper. So then Batman feels like he needs to use the gun that killed his parents in order to stop crime. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense, but I'll play along for now. And here's how the two plots intermingle. So Bruce, wants to date Rachel Caspian, the daughter of Judd Caspian. Now, that's not a big plot point until we find out on like page 2 of the book that Judd Caspian is the Reaper, or he was, and now that he's back in Gotham, seeing how corrupt and horrible the city is, he has made his return as the Reaper to clean up the city once more, and possibly find someone to replace him. Now, I do have to say, I feel like Bruce's relationship with Rachel is kind of toxic, and the reason being is that at the beginning of the book, Rachel is actually going to take her vows soon to become a nun, which, good for her. You don't get to see that very often in real life or in comics. But Bruce almost takes that like a challenge. I mean, it's really depicted in this scene here where he tells Alfred to lay off calling Rachel because he's got it instead. And look how maniacal he looks. That is horrifying to see Bruce in this way. So Batman feels like even with the gun, he's still not powerful enough to stop the Reaper on his own. So he enlists help from the mob. But then the mob has a hitman to work with Batman. And the hitman just so happens to be Joe Chill, which I don't even know what to say to that. So Batman obliges and works with Joe Chill, and they go out and they stop another mob crime organization. There are a lot of hippies with guns. All right, after some classic Joe Chill and Batman adventures together, we lead up to the ending of the book where the Reaper has devised a scheme in order to get Gotham City PD, the mob, Batman, and Joe Chill all in the same area. And once he does, man, he lays waste to everybody. The only people to get out of this is most of the Gotham PD, Batman, and Joe Chill. The mob did not make it. And at this point of the book, Bruce comes to Rachel and he asks, "What should I do in this situation?" And Rachel tells him, "Do what you think is right." And what Bruce thinks is right is to bring Joe Chill out to Crime Alley and kill him at gunpoint like he did to his parents. This leads to the final confrontation in the book, where Batman brings Joe Chill to Crime Alley, where Bruce's parents were gunned down as a kid, and reap his revenge. As Bruce Wayne goes for the kill, out comes the Reaper, who ices Joe Chill, and I ain't talking about Smirnoff. In a fit of rage, Batman chases down the Reaper, who actually now knows the identity of Batman. The Reaper leads Batman to the Wayne Foundation that's being built. Here at the final confrontation between the Reaper and Batman, Batman finally gets the upper hand, to the point where the Reaper is now almost fallen off the ledge of the building. At this point, the Reaper reveals his identity to Bruce, and they now understand that they are both mutually connected to each other, not just as vigilantes in the city, but as important people in Rachel's life. Bruce offers Caspian a hand to save him from the ledge, and this is when Caspian finally decides that he's done being the Reaper, and he informs Bruce that he can carry on the legacy as he lets himself go to fall off the 40-story building. Now, that would be a more dramatic ending, I think, if Caspian would have just let Bruce kill Joe Chill, and then he would now be a murderer, and now it would make more sense that he's the Reaper. But, this has to stay within continuity, and Bruce can't be a murderer, at least not till a later series. The best part in the story is actually the follow-up that happens a few years later. And it's not year 3, actually. It's called Batman Full Circle, where Mike Barr and Alan Davis come back and write a sequel to the series, where there is Batman and Dick Grayson Robin, which is, I think, pretty cool, because I feel like we don't get a lot of Dick Grayson Robin in this sequel series, which I'm actually not going to spoil a whole bunch, because I think it's the best part of this entire run, and you can read it for yourself. We get the return of the Reaper in continuity, so he's dead at this point. So Bruce is scratching his head like, how is the Reaper still alive? And it's actually a relatively fun story. It makes a little bit more sense than the main Batman Year 2 story. It's still a little funky at times, but you know what? I can't judge. I'm not a writer. I've tried to write short stories, and it is extremely difficult, and I have to give Mike Barr some leeway here. He had a challenge to write a sequel to Year 1, and that alone seems impossible to follow up. I think he went for more of a shock factor as the story progresses, and it's to keep the readers entertained. I would love to say the best part of this story is Todd McFarlane's art, but Todd doesn't ink his art in this story. At least, I think he inks some of it, but he's not credited as the inker, and you can kind of tell because there are certain scenes, and I'm going to flash them on screen so you can take a look, where a lot of like the shadows and coloring and the inking is very flat and not hyper detailed like Todd's normal artwork when he inks it. But then you have some really cool looking scenes with like Jim Gordon hyper detailed, or this scene here which looks awesome. And I wish the book looked more like that, or if Alan Davis would have just drawn the entire book. But you know what? If you read the foreword to this book, you'll understand why he doesn't. Now, let's talk about the why. Why does Year 2 exist? And it's obvious. Year 1 was so popular that of course they had to make a sequel series to the Year saga? Set franchise? I don't even know what to call it. Imprint? Maybe? You have other series within the Year lineup like Nightwing Year 1, which I hear is really good, or Batgirl Year 1. But Year 2 falls very, very short. But luckily, it's actually retconned at this point. This is, I don't consider continuity. I would probably say this is like a one-off Elseworlds tale nowadays. It was continuity at one point, but get this thing out of here. Now, this is my Year 2. This is Batman by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and this retcons everything that's in Batman Year 2, and I'm glad it does. This is a much better story. If you've ever seen any of the current Batman live-action movies, most of them are based off of material from this, which you can pick up the omnibus still, and then there are some deluxe editions that recently got released, and there are absolutes, but those are way out of print at this point. But Jake picked them up recently, and you can check out his video on all his whales that he's caught. If you are a Batman reader, I do suggest to read this at some point. I would probably say pick this up as one of your first reads after Year 1, because this is a predecessor to Year 1. Now, as much as I love talking about this one, I do have to bring back Year 2, because Year 2 is just as important as Batman by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. Without Batman Year 2, we wouldn't have Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which is considered one of the best Batman movies, and that's crazy to me that something of this nature can spawn something so great. Now, I think that at some point, every Batman fan should read Batman Year 2. Not because it's great, but because it was part of the Batman mythos at some point. And in order to experience the best of comics, sometimes you have to experience the worst. And you know what? I'm okay with that. If I have inspired you to read this book, I do need to state, I'm sorry. Now, with my conclusion out of the way, let's get into the outro. Now I want to thank everybody for checking out Brave Boys Beyond. This is one of the first videos that I'm creating for the channel, and I'm so excited to create more content for you guys. If you really like this video, leave a like down below, consider subscribing, and tell me down below, what do you think of Batman Year 2? Now, I know if Omar watched this video, he's going to say how this is a phenomenal book. I don't know if I trust his opinion on that one, but you know what? We're all entitled to our own opinions. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.